I have regrets. When I decided to try this, I forgot about the messed up books I was forced to read in school. The farthest back that I could remember was 6th grade. There were only 2 that I can remember from this particular year, and I remember being really confused on why I was like 12 years old being forced to read these books, and as a 25-year-old woman, I am still very confused on why they made me read these. The 2 books we will be discussing are A Child Called It by Dave Pelzer and Wringer by Jerry Spinelli. I do want to preface this by saying there are quite a few triggers here. I will be discussing them in this video centered mostly around violence towards children. I will not ever be offended if you skip something because of a trigger. Honestly, I was a little mentally not okay after reading and researching for this video. Yes, I could have skipped this particular year, but as I progress through school, some of the books don't get any easier to digest. It wouldn't make sense to skip these when it doesn't get any better from here. With that being said, let's talk about A Child Called It. Published in 1995, it is the first of 3 books documenting different stages in the life of Dave Pelzer, the victim of one of the worst abuse cases in California history. This particular book details Dave's life between the ages of 4 and 12. Through 7 chapters, we learn that Dave had the most useless father in existence. Seriously, I just want to talk to this man. But apparently, Dave's father passed in 1980, and since I don't fuck with Ouija boards, I'm gonna leave this alone. The book starts off with Dave explaining how happy his home is with a firefighter dad and a stay-at-home mom. Dave explains trips, special holidays, and spending time with his father were the high points of his life. However, his parents started drinking more, and I'm not gonna call this woman a mother because she sure as hell is not one. So when the woman and Dave are left alone, the abuse starts. She felt David was a bad boy and therefore should be held back and forced to redo the 1st grade despite doing well academically. I didn't know you could just decide that you wanted to hold your kid back. I thought that was something the school did. So obviously when he restarted the 1st grade, he was doing even better, and she claims that she got a letter from the North Pole saying that he was bad, therefore no Christmas. It just spirals from there. There are multiple accounts of how this woman beat Dave. She tried and failed to hide it from her other sons. They didn't do anything out of fear they would get the same, and it went on like that for years. Like I said, this one book covers about 8 years of his life. In addition to the beatings, she would withhold food. This caused Dave to resort to stealing food. He often stole from other classmates, the cafeteria. Hell, he even went to a local grocery store. And each time he was caught, his mother was called and things would escalate. The woman would even put scraps of food from dinner in a trash can and place it next to the sink so Dave could smell it while he was washing the dishes in scalding hot water. And then when he was caught stealing food out of the trash can, the woman would purposefully throw away spoiled food, knowing he would eat it. It got to the point that eating out of the dog bowl was his only source of food, and even his brother started beating him. You may be asking, where was the dad? I don't like calling this man a dad either, so we're just gonna say the man. The man would try to sneak food to Dave, and he fought with his wife about it on Dave's behalf. However, it got to the point to where he would just leave after arguments with his wife, knowing damn well what was gonna happen as soon as he was gone, and then she started to blame Dave for her marital problems. It devolved into this man not necessarily being complicit, but more aloof to it. The woman started bringing him in to watch her punish Dave when he got caught stealing the food. There was an incident involving some frozen hot dogs that he stole, and I'm not diving into that. But just know this man was there and basically just said to do it and she'll leave you alone. And somehow it keeps getting worse. Things hit the fan when this bitch fucking stabs Dave, and he goes to the man who he wants so desperately to be his hero, and he tells him that the woman threatened to kill him if he didn't finish the dishes. This man responds with, well, you better get him done, and don't tell her you talked to me, I don't want to deal with this tonight. Sir, your son was stabbed, your son is currently bleeding, but sure, you don't want to deal with that tonight. I really want to understand the husband's point of view. His wife is clearly abusive to him as well, and I understand that. What I do not understand is seeing the things she has done to the child they both created and not even acknowledging the pain that Dave is experiencing. Luckily, Dave's removal from the home was shortly after this incident. The school nurse finally got the principal to call the police. The police took Dave and told the woman he was never coming back, and from there we learned that Dave was in foster care until he aged out. Now, when this book was published, it was very, I don't want to say loved, but it was a bestseller, so much so my 6th grade English teacher thought a group of 12-year-olds needed to read it. Bruh. Anyway, in 2002, a solid 7 years after its publication, a journalist started to question the validity of the stories recalled in the book, claiming Dave could recall a lot of stories about the abuse, but not a lot of detail that would prove the abuse. Bitch, What part of he was abused between 4 and 12 do you not get? It took place in the 70s, for fuck's sake. What evidence could he have obtained at that age and time, huh? Oh, and it doesn't stop there. There are even family members that are doubting Dave's story, including his grandmother, who believes abuse took place, but it wasn't as severe as Dave wrote about. Don't make me fight you, Granny. And to make things even worse, one of the brother, Steven, denies that there was any abuse at all, believing Dave was placed in foster care for starting a fire and shoplifting. On the opposite side of this, we have Dave's brother Richard, who wrote his own book, basically saying everything Dave wrote about was true. At the end of the day, I have no idea what really happened in this home. I just know what this book tells me. And what this book tells me is Dave experienced things no living creature should ever have to endure at the hands of someone who was supposed to protect him. I remember being triggered and upset reading this as a kid, and honestly, I felt the same way now. The only difference is I know how to deal with things that upset me. I didn't have that ability at the age of 12. I was viscerally upset reading this at that age, and I do not recommend this book for children. I don't know what this teacher was on. On to the next book, which is Wringer by Jerry Spinelli. I will admit this book is a lot less messed up than A Child Called It, but that doesn't mean it's all sunshines and rainbows over here. This book is simultaneously disturbing and boring. We're following a 9-year-old boy, so I am clearly not the demographic for this book, but that's kind of why I'm doing this experiment, to see how well these books aged with me. Wringer is about a boy named Palmer who was given the nickname Snots on his 9th birthday, because I guess that's what 9-year-olds do, but I'm calling him Palmer because Snots? Seriously? No. After his birthday party, him and the boys go to this park where something dark happens to Palmer. This is where we learn that at the end of August every year in this whack-ass town, there is a festival where the men in his village capture pigeons just to shoot them down, and any pigeons that may be left lying on the ground in agony are then the responsibility of the Wringers. Wringers are 10-year-old boys that seek out wounded pigeons and wring their necks. I don't fully grasp the concept as to why, so don't ask me. Anyway, Palmer doesn't want to be a Wringer at all, but feels all the pressure to be one by both the shitty boys he hangs out with and the fact his father was a famous Wringer himself. Outside of the shitty boys mentioned, there is a girl, Dorothy, that's his neighbor. She openly speaks against hurting the pigeons, and as a result, she is bullied by the boys in the neighborhood. The same boys that Palmer is now hanging out with. He didn't invite Dorothy to his birthday party, which obviously hurt her feelings, and Palmer shakes it off, but when he's given the treatment, which is code for getting punched very hard for every year of your life and one to grow on, this kid punches Palmer so hard that he is bruised, he cannot move his arm, and he is displaying it with pride. The thing is Dorothy doesn't give not one shit about it, and it makes Palmer mad, which is kind of funny. This doesn't have much bearing on the story progression. I just think it's pretty badass that Dorothy said, "Oh, you won't invite me? You don't exist to me anymore." Problem is, Dorothy ignores Palmer all the time, and his anger at her grows, causing him to start picking on her with the other boys. However, Palmer's redemption arc starts when a pigeon lands on his bedroom window. Considering all the pigeons in his town are gathered for slaughter, this was the first time he's actually really seen one up close. This bird that he eventually names Nipper is the star of the show, this chubby penguin that decides Palmer is his person. Palmer goes as far by saying he's either dumb, clumsy, or comedian, and the answer is yes. And I love him for it. And then it turns into Palmer doing any and everything he can to hide the fact that he now has a pet pigeon, even if it meant deflecting his friends to pick on Dorothy to avoid them coming to his house. Palmer's life turns into a balancing act of hanging out with pigeon killers and having a pigeon. Deflecting to Dorothy, who eventually crumbles, asking why Palmer is doing this to her, and it's so sad to see. Eventually, he brings Dorothy in on his secret pet. His 10th birthday is now approaching, therefore his turn to be a Wringer is closing in fast. His anxiety increased because he loves his pigeon. He doesn't want to kill them. He didn't want to kill them before, but it's even more of an issue now that he actually has a pet pigeon. However, he doesn't admit it to anyone but Dorothy. They try to figure out a way to hide the secret. His efforts are unfortunately in vain as them annoying ass kids start to figure it out and spread rumors that Palmer has a pigeon, effectively ruining his life. As the next pigeon massacre approaches, we learn that his parents knew about Nipper and his dad actually loves the bird too. Again, the problem is, it's almost pigeon killing time. Palmer gives Nipper to Dorothy to release him away from town to keep him safe. I sincerely wished that is where the story ended, but unfortunately, the festival happens, pigeons are being shot, and, well, we kind of know where this is going. Nipper is amongst the pigeons being slaughtered. This has to be absurdly traumatic to this child. And of course, Nipper found Palmer and landed on his head like the little birdie likes to do. And Beans, who is the leader of the Asshat Brigade, snatches the bird off of Palmer and tries to kill it. Nipper is injured and Palmer carries him off to the disapproval of this very psychotic crowd. There's an unnamed kid in the crowd that reaches out to pet Nipper, and their only line of dialogue is, "Can I have one too, Daddy?" That's where the book ends, so it doesn't really tell us if Nipper survived or not. I'm gonna be very honest, I have no idea what these books were supposed to teach me. Granted, A Child Called It is just a retelling of abuse without really a message, but Wringer was praised for its ability to subtly introduce tough topics to kids. What tough topics? That kids are assholes? I didn't need to read a book about dead pigeons to teach me that. In the end, the big question I wanted to ask myself was, do I think these books were appropriate for 6th graders? And the answer is a resounding no! Over a decade later, and I can still feel how triggering A Child Called It was when I read it in school. I'm not saying it can't be read in school, but maybe wait a few years before forcing content that hard onto kids. Wringer wasn't that graphic, so I suppose it would be fine for 6th graders, but one could argue the concept of dead birds might be too much for some kids. So A Child Called It is a definite no, but The Wringer is a solid maybe. So this is going to be a fun little series that I will be doing. Again, I will be having more content coming your way. In the meantime, bye.
Snow White is dead. One of us. And you're going to let this ignorant shit walk out of here in one piece. Out of my way. I'll show you how it's done.
What the fuck? What do you think you're doing?
Teaching him a lesson. Now pay attention.
Stop this right now! You enjoying yourself?
Immensely.
Snow.